There is a question that music historians have been sitting with for 50 years and have never fully answered. It goes like this. How does a boy from the Isle of Man, raised in the cheapest suburb of Brisbane, Australia, with no formal music training beyond what a household piano and a few guitar lessons could provide, write the defining sound of one of the most sophisticated musical eras in American history? Not contribute to it. Define it. The Bee Gees' contribution to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack is not a footnote in the history of late 1970s American pop music. It is the foundation. Without those songs, without How Deep Is Your Love and Stayin' Alive and Night Fever and More Than a Woman, the entire architecture of what we call the disco era looks different. Smaller. Less permanent. And the man who wrote them, who wrote most of them, who wrote them in 2 weeks in a chateau in France, who wrote them from descriptions of a script he hadn't read for a film he hadn't seen, is 78 years old and still writing. Still, after Robin, after Maurice, after Andy, after the disco backlash that tried to erase the decade he had defined, after a heart surgery at 68 that the tabloids reported as potentially fatal, after everything the industry and time and grief could do to stop him, Barry Gibb is still writing. That is the story nobody has fully told about Barry Gibb. Not the story of the 3 dead brothers, though that story is real and vast and sits under everything. Not the story of the disco era, though that story changed popular music permanently. The story of the songwriter, the craftsman, the man who sits at a piano or picks up a guitar at 78 years old and writes a melody that did not exist yesterday, and who has been doing this since he was 9 years old in a terraced house in Chorlton-cum-Hardy in Manchester, and who has not yet found a sufficient reason to stop. Have you ever been so completely defined by one era of your work that the rest of the work became invisible, and continued doing the work anyway, not to correct the record, but because the work itself was the point? Because that is the biography of Barry Gibb, not the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. What came before it, and what has come after it, and what runs through all of it like a single unbroken thread. But the Isle of Man comes first, and then Manchester, and then a family that sang together because singing together was cheaper than anything else they could do. Barry Allen Crompton Gibb was born on the 1st of September, 1946, in Douglas, on the Isle of Man, the first child of Hugh Gibb and Barbara Gibb, both from Manchester. Hugh was a drummer, not a professional one, not a man who had organized his life around music as a career, but a man who played in dance bands and who kept a drum kit in the house, and who brought into every room he entered the specific energy of someone for whom rhythm was a first language. Barbara sang. The household's relationship with music was not aspirational. It was daily, ordinary, unremarkable to the people inside it, the way that certain households are organized around sport or religion without anyone consciously deciding that this is how we are. Music was how the Gibbs were. When Barry was 2.5 years old, he pulled a pot of boiling tea from a counter and was so severely burned that the hospital doctors told his mother the boy would not survive the night. He survived. He has no memory of the incident. He has the scars. There is something in that early fact, the survival against medical expectation, the body that refused the doctor's certainty about its limits, that resonates across everything that followed. Barry Gibb has spent a lifetime outlasting what seemed inevitable. The family moved to Manchester when he was 6, to a terraced house on Keppel Road in Chorlton-cum-Hardy. Hugh played in dance bands. Money was managed rather than abundant. There were 6 people in the house, and eventually there would be another, Andy, the youngest, arriving in 1958. The 3 middle children, Barry, and the twins Robin and Maurice, born in December of 1949, were already a unit before any of them could articulate what a unit was. They sang together in the same way they breathed and ate and argued, automatically, constantly. Harmonies that their mother remembered even before the boys understood what harmony meant. The first band was called the Rattlesnakes. Barry on guitar, Robin and Maurice on acoustic guitars or whatever was available. Their first public performance was the 28th of December, 1957, the interval of a Saturday morning film screening at Manchester's Gaumont Theatre. The audience was children. The performers were children. Nobody was paid. The payment was the experience of having done it, and the knowledge, which arrived immediately and completely, and which none of them ever questioned after that morning, that the three of them in front of a room produced something that neither of them produced separately. Have you ever discovered, in a single moment, the irreducible thing that you were, the combination, the specific configuration of yourself with another person or a group, that made something neither of you could make alone, and known immediately that this was what the rest of your life was going to be organized around? Because that is what the Gaumont Theatre gave Barry Gibb on the 28th of December, 1957. Not fame, not a plan, the knowledge. In August of 1958, the family sailed for Australia on the Fair Sea. They settled in Brisbane, in Crib Island, a suburb later demolished to make way for Brisbane Airport, which is perhaps the most economical description of how modest the circumstances were. Barry sold soft drinks at Redcliffe Speedway to contribute to the family income. He brought Robin and Maurice in because the selling went better with singing, and the singing drew crowds, and the crowds drew attention. The two Bills, Bill Good, the racetrack owner, and Bill Gates, a Brisbane disc jockey, heard them and provided the initials for the name. The Bee Gees. The Bee Gees. Barry left school in 1961. He was 15. He had been performing publicly for 4 years. He had been composing music, actually writing songs, not covering other people's, for most of that time. The decision to leave school was not a rebellion, but a calculation. The school was not going to teach him what he needed to know, and he already knew what he needed to know, and the time spent in school was time not spent doing the thing he already understood was his life's work. His parents did not stop him. His father, who had always understood music as vocation rather than hobby, did not stop him. What Barry Gibb was building across those Brisbane years and the club performances and the Australian television appearances and the Australian hits that preceded their arrival in London was a songwriting philosophy. Not a conscious one, he has never described it in those terms, but a set of instincts developed through constant practice about the relationship between melody and emotion. The specific way that a chord change at precisely the right moment in a lyric can produce a physical response in a listener that has nothing to do with the lyric's meaning. The way that the voice, his specific voice, or the specific blend of 3 specific voices, can carry a feeling that the words are only approximating. He was learning this, song by song, before he had the vocabulary to describe what he was learning. They arrived in London in 1967. Brian Epstein, who managed the Beatles, expressed interest. Robert Stigwood signed them before Epstein could. New York mining disaster 1941 was released, and radio programmers assumed it was the Beatles. It wasn't. It was 3 brothers from Brisbane who had been performing together for 10 years and who had developed, in that decade of constant proximity and constant practice, a sound that the radio had never heard before and which it could not immediately categorize except as essential. The decade that followed produced the songs, not just the hits, though there were many legitimate, genuine hits of the first order. The songs. Massachusetts. To Love Somebody, which Otis Redding had been scheduled to record before his death, which has been covered more than 1,000 times by artists from every genre, which is as complete a pop song as the decade produced. I've got to get a message to you. How can you mend a broken heart? Run to me. The catalog of the late 1960s and early 70s is not a run-up to Saturday Night Fever. It is a body of work with its own weight and permanence, and it was built by Barry Gibb in the front parlor or the studio, usually in direct collaboration with Robin and Maurice, almost always starting with the same thing, Barry at the piano or guitar, a melody arriving that was not there before. And then, the rupture. Robin left in 1969 over disputes about whose songs were featured and whose voice led. The specifics of the dispute are as old as creative partnerships. Who is more important? Who gets more credit? Whose contribution is the foundation and whose is the ornament? Barry and Robin had been arguing versions of this question since they were teenagers. For a year and a half, they argued it in separate studios and separate careers. And then they came back together, because the alternative was clear to all 3 of them, and it was worse. The reunion produced the albums of the early 1970s, and the early 1970s produced the collaboration with Arif Mardin that opened the door to everything else. Arif Mardin was a Turkish-American musician, composer, and producer whose understanding of what a voice could do was as sophisticated as anyone's in American music. He heard something in Barry's falsetto register that Barry had not fully examined. He encouraged it. He built arrangements around it. And the combination of what Mardin heard and what the brothers brought produced Jive Talkin' and You Should Be Dancing and the entire first wave of what became the second phase of the Bee Gees' career. Not a pivot, a development. The natural extension of 20 years of writing songs about emotion, now applied to a new key. The phone call from Robert Stigwood in late 1975 changed everything and nothing. Stigwood had committed to producing a film about the Brooklyn disco scene. He needed music. He wanted the Bee Gees. He sent them a description of the script, not the script itself, not a rough cut, not a scene breakdown. A description. The setting. Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. The character. A young Italian-American man who is nobody during the week and the king of the dance floor on the weekend. The mood. Euphoric. Desperate. Hopeful. Doomed. Barry Gibb has described going into the recording sessions at the Château d'Eau in France in a state of unusual creative receptivity. He has said that the songs arrived the way the best songs arrive, not constructed, but received. How Deep Is Your Love was there, essentially complete, within an hour of sitting at the piano. Stayin' Alive arrived from the image of a man walking down a street with complete, defiant confidence in his own survival. Night Fever came from the sound the film was going to make, the physical experience of the dance floor before anyone had seen the dance floor. More Than a Woman was, in some fundamental sense, the whole decade's understanding of romantic love compressed to 3 minutes and 38 seconds. Have you ever worked on something in a state of flow so complete that the thing seemed to be producing itself, where your job was not to create but to accurately receive what was already trying to exist? Because that is what the Château d'Eau sessions were. Not genius, not luck. 20 years of constant practice in the art of melody, arriving at a moment when everything the practice had built was exactly what the moment needed. Saturday Night Fever was released in December of 1977. The soundtrack album sold more than 40 million copies. The Bee Gees won 5 Grammy Awards for the record. Barry Gibb was 31 years old. He had been making music professionally for 20 years. And then the backlash. The Disco Sucks movement of 1979 was not simply a cultural reaction to a genre. It was a reaction to everything the genre represented. The clubs, the sexuality, the racial and gender diversity, the specific way that disco had taken the dance floor and made it a space where certain hierarchies did not apply. The destruction of a crate of disco records at a baseball game in Chicago in July of 1979, organized by a rock radio DJ and attended by 50,000 people, was not a statement about the quality of the music. It was a statement about who the music belonged to and who it was for. Barry Gibb, who had written the songs that more than any others had defined the target of that statement, watched it happen from England. The 1980s were, commercially, the most difficult decade of his career. The group's standing with radio programmers dropped precipitously. Albums that were, by any honest critical assessment, as well crafted as their predecessors, received a fraction of the attention. He continued writing. He wrote for others. Islands in the Stream for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. He wrote Heartbreaker for Dionne Warwick. He produced Barbra Streisand's Guilty album. He kept the craft active in the only way it can be kept active, by practicing it, constantly, regardless of what the market was saying about the results. And then the losses began. Andy Gibb died in March of 1988 at 30 years old. The heart inflammation. The career that had begun with a model built on the 3 older brothers, the career that Barry has said he encouraged, and which he has also said he regrets encouraging because the pressure of the model contributed to the fragility that the illness found. His last words to Andy were not warm. Barry has said this. The argument that was still running when the call came was the argument that would never be resolved, because the person who was in it was no longer available for resolution. Maurice died in January of 2003. The twisted intestine, the emergency surgery, the 48 hours from fine to gone. Barry and Robin were not getting on well in the period before Maurice died. He has said this too. The center of the three-brother arrangement, the person who could be in the room with both of them simultaneously without it tipping into the argument that Barry and Robin always moved toward, was gone. The arrangement became, for a time, impossible. Robin died in May of 2012. Cancer. He had visited Barry in London during the chemotherapy, had told him he loved him. 6 weeks later, he was gone. Barry has said, "In every single case, my greatest regret is that we weren't great pals at the end. There was always an argument in some form." He has said it with the specific, undefended honesty of a man who has had 12 years to look at the fact and has not been able to change it or explain it away. The argument was structural. Three brothers, 70 years of making things together, the creative intimacy that produces love and resentment in equal measure. The argument was who they were, and they could not resolve it before the endings came. Linda Gray had told him, in the year after Robin died, to stop floundering. Get back in the studio. He did. In the Now in 2016. Glastonbury in 2017, the Legends slot, 60,000 people singing Stayin Alive back to him. He stood at the microphone and held the note. And then Greenfields in 2021. The album of reimagined Bee Gees songs recorded with country artists Dolly Parton, Keith Urban, Alison Krauss, Brandi Carlile, Miranda Lambert, Luke Combs, Jimmy Buffett. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard Country Albums chart. A British songwriter from the Isle of Man and Brisbane, at 74 years old, at the top of the American country chart, with songs that he had written across 50 years now finding new rooms to fill in new voices. That is not a capstone. That is a songwriter at work. He was knighted in the 2023 King's Birthday Honors. He is, as of 2025, 78 years old, still writing, still performing, still the only surviving member of the group that defined a decade and whose catalog has generated more than 1 billion streams across Spotify and Apple Music in the last 5 years alone. He sometimes hears his brothers in the studio. Robin's harmony, Maurice's chord choice. He has said this in multiple interviews across the years since 2012. He does not call it haunting, he calls it company. The brothers who could not stop arguing when they were alive are present in the work when the work is being done, and in the work the argument is not running, and in the work it has never needed to run. There is something in Barry Gibb's story that is easy to miss because the Saturday Night Fever songs are so large. The story of the boy in the Gaumont Theatre. The boy who was told he would not survive the night and did. The boy who stood on the Redcliffe Speedway and discovered that the selling went better with the singing, and the singing drew crowds. The man who sat in a French chateau and received the songs that the decade had been preparing him to write. The man who has buried 3 brothers and who still goes into the studio and still hears them there and still produces, in the specific combination of his voice with the piano and the memory of what the 3 of them could do together. Music that the world has never heard before. He has said, "I don't see any reason to stop." He has said it with the equanimity of a man for whom stopping would require a reason, and who has not been given one. The 78-year-old body that survived the night in 1946 is still at the piano. Still, after everything that was supposed to stop it. What do you keep making? Not for the market, not for the critics, not for the memory of the era that made you famous, but because the making itself is the only way to stay in conversation with the people and the experiences and the losses that have shaped you. Leave a comment below, because that is the question Barry Gibb has been answering since he was a boy in Manchester with 2 brothers and a guitar, and the answer has never changed. He sits down. He plays. Something arrives that wasn't there before. He writes it down. He is still here. If this story found something in you, subscribe and tell me in the comments which Barry Gibb song do you think is his most complete work as a songwriter. Not the most famous, the most complete. Because the man who wrote How Deep Is Your Love also wrote To Love Somebody, and Massachusetts, and Immortality with Celine Dion. The catalog is larger than the era. the songwriter is older than the decade that made him famous, and he is still at the piano.